the people know that we're doing this. Hope everybody is well out there. Everybody, this is a little count up so Cecil can do a little snip snip so that we don't lose any of this. Uh, I have been singing Staying Alive," but now the song in my head is, or my wife's head is more like Rage Against the Machine. But we'll be part of the machine for a few minutes here as we say, who should you be trying to trade for in dynasty leagues right now? That and more this week on the couch. Welcome back, Lord Reeves. Who are you trying to trade for in dynasty leagues right now?
I mean, I think that there's obviously a number of players you could try to trade for, and a lot of players had their dynasty stock, rise and fall this past year. But I think the number one guy I would like to get, if I could get him, and I would be willing to pay the sticker price because I don't believe it's done going up, would be Calvin Ridley. And I know that
Nice.
that's a pretty popular take amongst fantasy circles, but a lot of people. I always see the corollary of people drawing that. Calvin Ridley is this year's Chris Godwin, but
Mm-hmm.
that's not really true because we have a tangible sample. Like Godwin still took a leap of faith for some people last year because he had no tangible production. Playing as that third wide receiver. His first couple of years in the league. Ridley, on the other hand, has really given us, 2 years of showing us what he can do with actual targets. I mean, just the past 2 years in the NFL, I mean, he's only had 92 and 93 targets, but he's ranked 33rd amongst all wide receivers in targets, but he's 6th in touchdowns. He's 17th in catch rate. He's 25th in yards per target. He's 22 in PPR fantasy points over his span. So he's shown that he can outkick his opportunity as well. And now that opportunity has finally arrived we've seen a little bit of it with the trade of Mohamed Sanu halfway through this year. They don't really add anyone in the draft. They only bring Hayden Hurston as a direct replacement for Austin Hooper. So the target volume is going to rise. And when you look at Dirk Cutter's marriage with Matt Ryan, he has been in top 5 in pass attempts every year with Dirk Cutter that paired together. So the opportunity for Calvin Ridley is finally going to come. And then we also understand, too, that the inevitable shoe is going to drop for one Julio Jones. Am I saying it's going to be this year? I am not. This is a guy that still had 1,300 yards at age 31 a year ago, and he hasn't really shown those signs. But we do know that, the hands of Father Time are undefeated, and eventually this is going to turn into Calvin Ridley's, gig, and quarterbacks are playing longer than ever. So Matt Ryan still probably has, 5 to 6+ years in him still if he chooses to play that long. So, I mean, he's definitely, like I said, it's a popular take, but there's a reason why it's popular. It's really hard to punch holes in. And I still think he's even a little bit undervalued
Yeah.
in Dynasty and redraft. So that's why I said I'm still willing to pay the sticker price for him, what it costs to get him.
Well, I think that, and by the way, folks, if you don't know, Sharp Football Analysis, Warren Sharp site, that's where you can find Lord Reeves, Rich Hribar's work. And you're doing an excellent series on a dynasty. I don't know what you called it. In my head, I want to call it like dynasty price check. But you give trade value comparables at every position. So it's one thing to say, go get this guy. It's another thing to say, here are some players that might be in the vicinity in value that you could dangle. And then what I really love that you did, Rich, in your Calvin Ridley talk is to say sometimes paying sticker price or maybe even overpaying is still the wise move. Like paying 110% or 120% of perceived value can still be a great move. And I always talk about this in redraft leagues where reaches turn into value picks and value picks turn into busts 2 or 3 weeks into the year. So, we're in the middle of the MFL 10 of death, where a pick that is a reach, which we have to do because of the nature of the viciousness of this league. As soon as the season starts, you can say, well, he had a 6th-round ADP. I took him in the 5th, but he's obviously worth a 2nd or a 3rd, or vice versa. But what I like what you're saying this about Ridley, because paying what Ridley is worth or even overpaying for him once the season starts, just like with Godwin. I made a terrible Chris Godwin trade in a league that we're in together, but I thought I was getting Odell Beckham. Anyway,
Yep.
and you bringing up Ridley, it brings up some interesting things because I had just got a question in a 0.5 PPR dynasty startup. Rich, someone asked me, should I draft Julio or Ridley at the 2-3 turn? And I paused, and immediately Ridley was the name. And I think it's Ridley, like you said. I mean, maybe this year Julio is worth more than Ridley. Obviously, Julio is going to get drafted ahead of Ridley in redraft leagues, but maybe next year Ridley moves ahead, and certainly within the 3-year window, Ridley will move ahead of Julio, and it gives you that all important skill in dynasty leagues of being a little bit early of the inflection point in the curve instead of waiting for the inflection point in the curve, and then it's too late. On Ridley, a couple of things I want to bring up because your work and analysis is always right on, and I love that you've always been like our mutual friend Evan Silva, combining analytics and a numbers approach, but also watching the game and trusting what your eyes tell you. Is Calvin Ridley a good argument against breakout? Well, I don't know what his break, see, because people move from age to breakout age, right? Because one of the arguments against Calvin Ridley wasn't he like 23 in the draft?
He was an older prospect.
He was an older prospect. So how do we, is it just because of Alabama and how many players he had to share with, and that's why he didn't come out early? Like, how do you feel like Calvin Ridley may change the conversation about prospect age? Because we're focused on the 20 and 21-year-olds, and he's that exception.
Yeah, I think he already has changed it a little bit, and and honestly, the prospect work is ever since we've been doing it, and analytics have gotten involved. It's an ever evolving process, and we try to find new angles and find out things that we thought worked and then didn't work, and what was the exception, and why did this needle move. And I think Calvin Ridley is one of those guys outside of the Alabama things. Every year we kind of are going through this with an Alabama guy, but he was an older prospect, but he did pop in a number of areas that we found out that are relevant. One is, like yards per team target, and his involvement there in terms of a breakout age was still strong, performer in that area. And then he was also still an early declare, even for being an older prospect, which, you don't see for an older prospect as much, but being an early declare is an obviously strong signal of where the NFL views you, entering the draft. So, I mean, yeah, he's kind of changed that a little bit. The Alabama thing in general, though, like, I just kind of throw my hands in the air that, like, listen, it's a conglomerate. It's a college conglomerate. They are just pushing NFL players through that system and churning butter there. We've seen it with Henry Ruggs. We've seen it with Henry Ruggs this year. Last year it was Josh Jacobs. The year before it was Ridley. One of these guys is always at the high point of statistical versus draft capital, and where scouts and view these players. And so far, the Alabama players won 2 out of 2 the previous 2 years. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, the Henry Ruggs conversation is probably a little bit different because, I think, from a lot of people have a kind of a misnomer, I think, of what Henry Ruggs is. A lot of people kind of view him as just a Darius Hayward Bay, and I hate to draw just that comparison because the Raiders and the speed, but a lot of people view him as just a straight line, downfield guy. But he actually wasn't the guy in the Alabama offense getting the downfield targets. He's running, he's running slants and digs, and he's got after the catch ability as well. And a lot of people view him as just the guy that can run straight and catch deep balls, but that's not really his game either. So, I would say that there's a good chance it could be 3 for 3. I think a lot of people are undervaluing him. I got Henry Ruggs at 206 in a recent Superflex draft, which I found is insane because, one, he was the number 1 wide receiver taken in this draft. 2, he's going to an opportunity there's a plethora of opportunity in the Oakland system, or Las Vegas system. Sorry about that. But is it a marriage with Derek Carr? How long does Derek Carr last? Right. Is he a marriage with Marcus Mariota? Because that's bad. Marcus Mariota and Derek Carr aren't really far off what they want to do either, in terms of targeting, throwing downfield, and taking chances. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that go into play, I think, with what will go into Henry Ruggs' 2020 season and beyond. But I think the conversation definitely has moved not just away from age, but in focusing on some other areas as well, instead of just getting hung up on whether a guy's an older prospect or not.
Yeah, Alabama is a perfect example. And the Mississippi wide receivers, too, because I think with DK Metcalf, there was some talk about, well, why is his production like this? Well, he was playing with A.J. Brown, speaking of Marcus Mariota. And A.J. Brown always comes to mind as, I was fading A.J. Brown in rookie drafts last year, even though I loved him as a player because of Marcus Mariota. Because I thought if Marcus Mariota can throttle the value out of Corey Davis, who I think is, I don't know if I still think I liked him a lot coming out of college, but then what's he going to do to A.J. Brown's value? But then enter stage left Ryan Tannehill, and even Derrick Henry. His value was kind of floundering last year before Tannehill. But the thing is, the player that could enter stage left is Mariota. And I mean, maybe next year the Raiders could do. Maybe the Raiders. The question, Rich, is predict where Aaron Rodgers is going to play in 2021 or 22 and get out ahead of that with the wide receivers that might unlock the value of
Denver.
Right? Elway. Elway's like he's going for the big fish. When Elway can get the big fish, he's going to. And absolutely, I think Denver is a team to watch there. New England's a team to watch. That's just a fun question looming over everything. And
Yeah.
real quickly to touch on what you said about Ruggs, and Ruggs is one of the last of that top tier receivers to go in a rookie draft I'm doing right now. It includes like Mike Clay and a few other people that people certainly know around the fantasy world. I think Mike Clay might have gotten him too, like 2-4 or something. Ruggs, like you said, he's not strictly a deep ball receiver. What I would do with Henry Ruggs, and I'll be interested to see what John Gruden has in mind, is I want to get him the ball in his hands while he's moving. Like I don't want to have him have to stop his feet or anything. Like you said, slants, short routes where he's getting the ball with his momentum already built up, and that's where he can really do damage, in addition to taking the top off of the defense. Real quickly, going back to Ridley, and the other thing in the background with Ridley that he did to reassure us a bit, but not totally last year, is unfortunately the name Sammy Watkins comes to mind when I think of Ridley, because Ridley was just spectacular in his rookie year. Then once the injury seal was broken, he wasn't quite the same.
Mm-hmm.
Last year, the injury seal got broken, and he kind of got back to form, and then didn't he end up the year injured? So
Yeah.
I hope that Ridley isn't one of those sports cars that, the more. Did you read the Sammy Watkins profile article, by the way?
Yeah, Sammy's living on his own wavelength,
Yeah,
but interesting cat. I mean, listen, whether you agree with stuff like that, everything you have to say or not, I mean, it's just nice to have people that just have a different worldview and are at least, operating on a different wavelength. We need more people like that.
Absolutely. And Tyler Dunn, got to mention Tyler Dunn, who gets players to open up and feel safe and feel like their true self is going to be received with dignity and respect, and not turned into something to be a punchline. And whatever you thought, and if you're wondering what we're talking about, go read Tyler Dunn's article with Sammy Watkins, and he says his whole worldview. And I think that there's poetic truth, if it's not verifiable scientific truth, to some of the things he said. There's absolutely poetic truth. Things he says, Rich, like words cast spells. Like absolutely, when you voice things, you're voicing intent and our ability. We're all magical in a way that we can change reality. We can all change reality. Like the fact that I want to tip the cap to Rummy, to our man, because that's part of why I'm talking to you right now, right? He said, you should check out this dude, Rich Hribar, Lord Reeves. You should have him on your show. God, I don't even know how long ago it's been. So that's going to be something I'm watching with Ridley. It's just the ability to stay healthy and stay at that level, playing at that level. And then the other answer here is it going to be Hayden Hurst, or is it going to be Ridley, or maybe Russell Gage? I don't think it's going to be Russell Gage, although he's developed as a receiver. When Gage was drafted, we weren't even sure if he's going to be a receiver or a defensive back. But what do you think about Hurst? Or, I mean, I've been saying from the beginning when Hurst got traded, I'll take Hurst over Hooper. Do you think that's even controversial at this point? And is it possible that Hurst is going to be the big beneficiary of Hooper going to Cleveland?
Yeah, I think so. I'm in the Hurst camp, the pro Hurst camp. Out of those guys, that if you miss out on tight ends, like where are we shopping? I think the Gesicki's and Fants and Hurst of the world. I do edge to Hurst the most, and it kind of goes back to what we talked about. Just that he's going from a team that ran the fewest amount of pass plays in the NFL to a team that ran the most. They've got a plethora of targets open, and you kind of hit upon it. They don't really have an interior target. Austin Hooper was getting his volume along with Mohamed Sanu, and then Ridley and Jones playing on the outside. This year, that interior is Russell Gage and Laquan Treadwell. Like those guys are not exactly a rogues gallery that's very daunting for Hayden Hurst to kind of, be a succubus of targets in that area of the field. And then, we still don't know where Hayden Hurst, the ceiling lies. I mean, he was probably a little overdrafted. He was definitely overdrafted in my book. But he's got, he hits the thresholds of kind of athleticism required to play the position. He was good with his opportunities in Baltimore. It just turned out he wasn't a better player than Mark Andrews. So, I mean, that's kind of, a lot of people think he failed there. It just turned out Mark Andrews was a lot better than Hayden Hurst, and there's a reason he played over him. So we don't even really know if Hayden Hurst is actually bad. It's just that Mark Andrews is really good. And we found that out over the last 2 years. But I think if the baseline is asking Hurst to be Hooper, that's not a low bar to achieve. No. And that's something I would like to latch on to, especially where he goes in drafts, which I believe is still, a lot lower than he should. And then we still don't know about some of these other guys. especially the Dolphins guys, especially just the transition from Ryan Fitzpatrick to Tua is going to be interesting because Ryan Fitzpatrick has just been a huge beneficiary for us in the fantasy community for so long. The way he stylistically plays the quarterback position has really been a boom for a lot of receivers. And we saw him really unlock Devontae Parker. How's Devontae Parker going to play with a quarterback that plays in structure, doesn't take those chances, and isn't willing to throw into windows that Ryan Fitzpatrick is? And Mike Gesicki's a similar type of player. He's a big slot guy. He's more wide receiver than he is, true inline tight end. And he benefited, not only from Preston Williams being out, but Ryan Fitzpatrick on that surge. So how does Tua impact him? And, they're also a team that's going to have, game script flip, even though we don't project the Dolphins to be good. They got absolutely nothing out of their backfield last year. Ryan Fitzpatrick was their leading rusher last year. Mark Walton was their leading running back rusher. Now they've got Matt Breida and Jordan Howard. They need some more production out of that area of the field. And then Noah Fant's getting Pat Shermer, who completely mismanaged Evan Ingram for the start of his career. So it's going to be interesting to see how that tier of guys plays out. I do like Hurst because I think the cost is great. I think that the bar for him to achieve relevancy and volume is low, which is what we always want to chase at the tight end position. So, I am in because I believe the Falcons are going to throw a lot, and I don't think that the collection of targets that are going to threaten the intermediate area of the field for Atlanta are that palpable.
Okay, so I'm making notes here on what round I'm going to have to take Hurst ahead of you in our.
Well, I did take Kittle. I took Kittle already, so.
Oh, you did. Good. I don't have to worry about you for that one. You bring up the Hurst Andrews thing, and it's kind of like, didn't Ed Dixon go ahead of Dennis Pitta, right? But Pitta ended up being the better, much more productive pro. And with Hurst, he got off on the wrong foot, with that stress fracture, and that's partially what opened the door for Andrews to take the opportunity and run with it. Although Hurst, the athleticism's there, and the reason I like Hurst a lot more than Hooper is that Hurst can add value to his targets with speed that Hooper didn't have, and I think Hooper was Matt Ryan's struggle target. When Matt Ryan was struggling, he knew he could find Hooper because those wide receivers created all that room in the middle of the field. So interesting things to talk about. But with Atlanta, it's continuity with Dirk Cutter. And as you brought up, the more interesting teams and more difficult teams to gauge are the teams that don't have continuity, whether it be because of quarterback, offensive coordinator, or both. Miami, I brought up, Rich, I'm sure you saw the anonymous player comments that Chad O'Shea was just a mess as the offensive coordinator, was instituting Josh McDaniel's system. It was too complex. He wasn't a good teacher. They bring in Chan Gailey, who's kind of at the other end of the spectrum. Like, he's kind of the MacGyver of, if you get that reference out there, folks, of offensive coordinators. I'm still, Miami needs to get their offensive line to settle, but it can't be worse than it was last year. It will be interesting, though, to see between Preston Williams, if he gets healthy, and Mike Gesicki and Devontae Parker, and then you got Jordan Howard and Matt Breida there, and then you also bring up Pat Shermer in Denver. With Pat Shermer in Denver, Rich, I think unfortunately it might be kind of like myself, especially, where like Arizona, where we got a little bit ahead of ourselves last year, and we thought this offense is just going to explode. Everyone's going to overachieve. And maybe not this year. We'll see about Drew Lock and all of those targets and how all that's going to shake out. But I want to circle all the way back around to rookies because you mentioned Henry Ruggs. Who are your draft crushes, man? Like, who are your rookies that you're either trying to get, or maybe you didn't realize that you were going to get them in a lot of drafts, but obviously you like them better than everybody else because you just end up with them on your team? Who have been your favorite rookies?
Well, I mean, throughout the whole process, I had Dobbins ahead of Swift, and he didn't go there in the draft, but I was just super high on Dobbins anyways. And I mean, for all the talk that we've had about the landing spot for Clyde Edwards-Helaire and a marriage of scheme, fit, and personnel, I think you can make the same argument for Dobbins. Now, it's different to how that parlays into fantasy football because Clyde Edwards-Helaire is going to catch a ton of passes, and Dobbins probably isn't. But for what Dobbins came from, running out of shotgun, RPO runs, and like what he's going to get now playing with Lamar Jackson, I mean, it is just beautiful. It is just an absolute supreme marriage. Will we see it completely in 2020 with Mark Ingram still there? Probably not. Maybe, if the door opens, we potentially could. Gus Edwards is probably gone after this year as well because he's playing under the IRFA contract. So, I mean, we'll probably have a takeoff, but I feel like the argument can be made in terms of, fit. and player person. Like Dobbins to Baltimore was supremely that. Absolutely, definitely in that boat there. For wide receivers, I'm trying to think of who I had higher than everyone else now that we're removed from the situation a little bit. I was, obviously in the Justin Jefferson camp. He's just kind of one of those guys I think that's like going to be like one of those, I don't want to be like cliche, but like a pro receiver. Like it's just good. He doesn't really do anything bad. He might not do anything exceptional, but he's like a great blocker. Like he's going to be one of those guys that like coaches are going to love, his quarterback's going to love because he can get open in the intermediate area. He also in 2018 was successful playing outside at LSU too. I know that he does project to be a big slot, and that's his apex role in the NFL, but he can win outside too. I just think he's going to be one of those guys that's going to be a really safe career. That's in store for Justin Jefferson. And if he unlocks the upside, you can get there as well. Brian Edwards was a guy I like, a lot of other guys too. And he going to play with Henry Ruggs. The thing I like about Brian Edwards is that he's one of those guys that like, years ago we would have fought over from like a size perspective. Like he's huge. This is why we want him, but he doesn't play that way. This is a guy that's used in the screen game, run after the catch. That's how he was used at South Carolina. Part of that was quarterback play induced to how they had to use him, and just because that's the only way they could get the ball to some of their receivers. But, he has that ability to play like a small receiver game as well, even though he comes with that prerequisite size that we'd have liked. So, I mean, those are kind of some of the guys there. I don't know if there's like a later round guy. I'm still interested in Tyler Johnson. I know that the book's kind of, the book was.
We'll watch Tyler Johnson eat the Chris Godwin cake this year, right? Like it was Greg Cosell who brought up that Tyler Johnson is a true slot. Does that mean that Godwin becomes a Z in this offense? Anyway, sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're 100% right. I mean, that's like, I feel like the argument that was made for Justin Jefferson is actually more applicable to Tyler Johnson. Whereas I think Justin Jefferson can actually win outside a little more than a guy like Tyler Johnson can. So does that, like you said, does that move Godwin outside more? Are they just a team that's inherently going to play more 12 personnel anyways this year, by not releasing, OJ Howard or trading him, and then, they still got Brait, and then we bring Gronk into the fold? Are they just a team that's going to play more 12 and it won't matter anyways for Tyler Johnson impacting Godwin? Will just them playing more 12 impact Chris Godwin like it did Cooper Kupp at the end of last season? So will that be a situation we see in Tampa Bay where the personnel that they want to play, just because Gronk and OJ Howard are more valuable on the field than rookie Tyler Johnson will be? Is that going to impact things? So it's Tampa Bay is just an interesting dynamic overall, because they're not going to have as much passing volume as they had last year. The game scripts aren't going to be what they were last year. Their defense is really good. They could play more slugfest than people think. That probably believe that they're going to play because of the weapons that they have and the Arians, offense, which is, pass heavy system. But that defense and, positive game script, Brady's age and Brady's ability to not turn the football over and give extra possessions to opponents, like it's going to be an interesting, dynamic, because it kind of started out that way for Tampa Bay last year.
Yes.
Where they played some slugfest.
First 2 games.
And then the defense kind of took a step back. They were a great run defense all year, but the secondary started to really get exposed in that middle stretch of the season, and they rotated guys in and out of the lineup trying to really solve that equation. But if the secondary plays, like it did the last 5 weeks last season, and that defensive front seven plays like it did the whole season, and you don't turn the ball over, and you get that marriage of game script, they might not be playing the kind of up tempo games that we kind of are hoping that they would play. It's something to keep in mind, though, for that Tampa Bay offense in general.
And Tampa Bay, I'm glad you're bringing this stuff up too, because again, quarterback, offensive coordinator, they have a change of quarterback, but not just a change of quarterback. I think, as you outlined, a change in their mentality, a change in their ideal game script, if you will, and it absolutely will revolve more around defense and taking care of the ball. And we saw it in the first 2 games last year. They lost to San Francisco in the opener last year, but only because Jameis Winston threw a pick 6 and another terrible interception. He
threw an interception on a screen pass in the game.
Yes, it was terrible. It was like one of the easiest pick 6s you'll ever see, like a pick 6 that maybe you or me might have been able to make. That
was a gift.
It was absolutely gift wrapped. And then the second week was the week they broke Cam Newton. And it was just, I think, did Peyton Barber have like 20 some carries in that game or something? And they were just content to grind the Panthers down to a nub. And I think you will see more of that kind of blueprint of the offense than the high. And I will admit this because I don't care. I mean, we're all going to be wrong sometimes. I remember after that second game, because that was a Thursday night game, thinking like, ooh, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin aren't going to be worth quite as much as people thought if this is because Todd Bowles, right? Todd Bowles has really made this defense come alive. But now they really made big investments to keep the defense intact. Like you said, it's just that young secondary, although I think they found some players in the secondary, the young players that they like and they can build around. It's going to be a different offense, and we don't know how big of a force Rob Gronkowski is going to be. See, that's another player I don't have to worry about beating you to the punch on in our draft. Is he going to be reinvigorated? Is he going to be more durable now? Is he going to have a little more spring in his step? That's going to be something interesting to watch. Questions. Since we talked about Tampa, and then I'll get back to your rookies. What do you think about Keyshawn Vaughn? Because I have a strong take on Vaughn, but you're usually much more level-headed than I am.
Well, I think he's a very baseline back. He's a grinder. He's going to get what's blocked for him. He's going to not do dumb things, which is kind of what has kept Ronald Jones from ascending. Is being a volatile player, and doing silly things. He makes the silly mistakes that gets him yanked from games. Because we can talk about things like pass pro and like how often guys are actually in pass protection and should it really be impacting. But it did matter for Ronald Jones.
What matters for coaches. That's catnip for coaches, yeah.
And should it matter much to coaches? It's a different conversation, like you said. It's moving the goalpost a little bit, but he's just a guy that he does everything like pretty well at the baseline. He's good in pass pro. He carried that Vanderbilt offense. I mean, you look at terms of running backs in this class, no back was really asked to do as much for his offense than he was. He's just not going to make a lot of electric plays, on the second level. But they might not need a guy to do that. I mean, you see, this is an organization. You just talked about how many touches they were willing to give Peyton Barber last year, and Peyton Barber was dead last in success rate, per touch in the NFL among running backs last year, and they didn't care. They were still giving him touches, to go along with Ronald Jones. So if Vaughn can just be better than Peyton Barber, I mean, if that's like I said, we talked about with the litmus test, because does Hayden Hurst just have to be Austin Hooper to be relevant? Well, does Keyshawn Vaughn just have to be Peyton Barber to get touches? That's a pretty low bar to get to. So then if he does play well with the touches he's getting, does that earn more touches? So, I mean, I think his dynasty value is overvalued. I think he's an interesting guy for 2020 based on what I said. Does he do the right things? And that's all they want, him to do, a player in that role to do the right things. That can give him some increased 2020 value. I think from Dynasty, he's a little bit overstepped. I don't think he's a long-term fantasy bell cow or fantasy, tide turner on a weekly level, on any level. So I think that's where I lie there. Like I said, I don't think he's a guy. I don't have negatives on Keyshawn Vaughn. I just don't think he's also a guy that's going to turn things around for fantasy owners either.
He's the running back that in a 2 or 3 year window, certainly, like he'll never be a running back that makes a team feel like we've got our running back situation settled for the next 5 or 6 years. He's competent, and they were looking for that. It's interesting too that I think the drop off, and I'm not counting A.J. Dillon. It truly is a second round back. But the drop off from those top 5 backs that went in the second round to the third round backs like Darrington Evans, etc., and Vaughn. I mean, it doesn't. If you do like a linear draft value curve, it makes it seem like it's just a gradual drop off. In terms of upside, it's a massive drop off this year. And I think you see it in rookie drafts, and it's interesting to look at rookie drafts and see that. Like you brought up Dobbins, and Matt Waldman would say Dobbins should be the number 1 pick in rookie drafts, and I think in a year or two we might say he was right. Of course, Matt Waldman was right, because when you see some of those runs where Mark Ingram could break out of the open field, Dobbins houses those runs. I'll keep saying that to remind people, because even in redraft, this is one I might have to get out ahead of you on, right? In our NFL 10 of death, I mean, even if he only gets 8 or 10 carries a game, you could be seeing a lot of 8 for 90 and a touchdown from him, with the nature of the Ravens' offense is going to put defenses in massive binds this year because they want to be in heavy box. But you add Duvernay, and someone had asked, "Are you a Duvernay guy?" I'm a Duvernay guy. Are you a Devin Duvernay guy?
I like the fit a lot just because of what they can do with him. Especially giving him quick hitters at the line of scrimmage, kind of what he kind of made his way. It's a really great fit as well. I mean, listen, the Ravens know what they're doing. They've known that we've known this for years. I mean, they know what they're doing at draft. They're getting a healthy Hollywood this year as well. I mean, he just is a kid that played with the screw in his foot and like really didn't run any pass routes the back half of the season. But you see like what he offers, you know, and when the Ravens, because remember too, something about the Ravens that we will see more of this year than we did last year is just they just led so many games throughout wire to wire. Like we did not get many jailbreak Raven scenarios. We had that week 3 game against the Chiefs, where they trailed big, and then the second half you get that production. And then it wasn't really until from that point on, until the playoff game, where they were like actually like in a jailbreak situation. And that game, like if they're going to play in like that type of foundation where Lamar Jackson can pass for 300 yards and rush for 100 yards, like that is just bonkers. Because I remember people just like immediately highlighting how bad Lamar Jackson played in that game, and I thought that was just insane. Anyway, they had some variants kind of shoot themselves in the foot. They had like 2 4th-and-1s they missed. They had a drop pass interception that kind of put them in that game script. But like you see the absolute fantasy ceiling of, we saw the fantasy ceiling for Lamar when they just played in control all season. Like that game against Tennessee, like if you get a few more of those games here, like those are games that just ultimately just like shut down your opponent. Like you can't overcome fantasy performances like that. Like if your opponent has a game like that, you know, where you got both bonuses on DraftKings that weekend. But they're reverting, going back to what Hollywood though. We see Hollywood's involvement when that script can come up and the upside he possesses in that type of situation in that game, you know, and then we had the early season run from Hollywood, and then he had the ankle injury, and then, you know, I don't know if it was a concussion he had off that end zone target against the Steelers or not. But, you know, he just really never ran a lot of routes, and then he played hurt all year. We're going to get them in some negative game script. He's a player, I think, that, you know, coming back in year 2, we are in that MFL 10 of death, and I really just stared at Hollywood for my last pick. It was, I knew there was no chance he was coming back to me, and I really was looking at him really hard and wanting to get him because he's a guy I've been drafting a ton of because he goes in the 7th round of all drafts. I think there's a lot of upside there. There's probably not the kind of target value we want to latch ourselves onto, but I think this goes back to like the Tyler Lockett conundrum of years past. He's just not a guy that's always going to need a lot of targets either. So, and especially when you're getting him that late, you're not paying a premium like you aren't this year. There's still a lot of room to grow. But yeah, Baltimore is just interesting altogether.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's a lot.
They create a lot of overachievers, right? Like 3 or 4 players in Baltimore's offense can be big-time overachievers in fantasy ADP. Because you saw, we're going to keep coming back to this MFL 10 of death. I took Lamar Jackson in the 2nd round because I still think people have not absorbed just how far ahead of the pack he was last year in terms of points. Like how big of an advantage. How many of the Lamar Jackson teams made either the semifinals or finals in your fantasy leagues, no matter who else they had? And that was, as you said, there weren't a lot of positive game scripts for him maximizing his potential. And he could get better, just like Patrick Mahomes. You know, these guys can get better. They're not flukes. This offense, with Marquise Brown, I mean, it won't be a shock if he stays healthy, Rich, like what, 8 long touchdowns, 10 long touchdowns over the course of the season? That puts 13, 14, 1,500 yards within his reach, even if he only gets 80 or 90 targets. Because what are defenses going to do? How do you defend Marquise Brown, Devin Duvernay in the slot, Mark Andrews, and this run game where you have Lamar Jackson and Mark Ingram or J.K. Dobbins or Justice Hill? And I'm going to ask you this one because Unipoke, love you, man. Almost always the first person in the chat room. So he wanted to know what you think about Gus Edwards. And I'll say what I think first because I'm the host and I can do that. It's my prerogative. I think Gus Edwards got a lot better last year than what we saw in his rookie year when he was like Gus the Bus. I'm wondering, you know, a smart team should be making an offer for him if the Ravens don't think they need him. And I think that he's not going to take over a backfield, but he could be like Rudy Johnson. Remember good old Rudy Johnson? Like he could be somebody that could be a thunder and lightning. He's a good running back. He just happens to be on a team that, like you said, knows what they're doing. So they have a lot of good running backs.
Yeah, he's interesting. I think he's going to be one of those guys that just falls on like, I think he's a better real player than fantasy player just because, you know, you're never going to get the receptions and he's going to have to run into volume, but he was awesome last year with the opportunities he got. I think probably the biggest disappointment you kind of hit on was Justice Hill. And Justice Hill kind of proved like he was disappointing in the run game. I think that was the most disappointing aspect. Is just those other two backs were so much better than him in the run game. And he was a rookie, and things get better. We've seen rookie backs also struggle with efficiency, but now bringing in Dobbins is kind of because in year two, next year it could just be Dobbins and Hill. So like we can't just completely bury Hill.
No.
But it was disappointing that I think I expected him to be a lot better in the run game than he was. We knew that they weren't going to really throw a lot of passes to their backs, but I expected him to be a lot better in the run game. Where Gus Edwards was completely shut him out of getting opportunities because of how good he was as that ancillary runner, as opposed to Justice Hill. So we can keep Justice Hill back of our minds. I understand he did take a big hit. Let's not kid ourselves that either.
Right.
We thought maybe he had a chance to kind of with Ingram being 30, could this be like one of these guys to be one of these zero RB candidates? And I think that he's probably moved off of not being able to jump really in terms of value unless there are multiple injuries now, even in the future. So, I think Gus is interesting, but definitely a better real player than fantasy football player. But
Poor Justice Hill. Well, with Justice Hill, what was exciting about him was if you were anticipating what Lamar Jackson would do to this offense, and he did it, then Justice Hill could get some lanes for his speed to really matter. The same way that J.K. Dobbins, and Dobbins doesn't have quite the same top-end speed as Hill, but he's got more contact balance and a little more of that flexibility. Dobbins reminds me a little bit of like Arian Foster. You remember how Arian Foster looked like his body was like flexy, bendy in this way, almost like rubber or something, the way he could like bend at the hips to get through holes. And then Dobbins can take off. But poor Justice Hill, and I don't want to see the Dobbins pick as an indictment of Hill because the Ravens had 2 second-round picks, and I think they never expected Dobbins to be there. Steelers should have taken him. Chase Claypool. Steelers should have taken him. Anyway, the Steelers should trade for Gus Edwards. Not that it'll happen. It's a Ravens show, but it's because this.
Are you not an Anthony McFarland guy?
Look. Here's what I'll say about Anthony McFarland. Okay, here's your pluses. You have Matt Canada on the staff now, who was his college coach. So that's a good thing, right? It's always good whenever there's a coach on a staff that is familiar with a player from college. And he has speed and he has some contact balance. What I don't like about Anthony McFarland is that if you watch his tape, he always wants the Matt Waldmanism of going to the corner store. He always wants to win those races to the corner, which in college you can. In the NFL, not as much. I want to see runners be more inside to outside than immediately want to get outside because they know no one can beat them to the corner. But look, Anthony McFarland was a better pick than Benny Snell. Okay, I'll give the Steelers that. And I still think it's going to be James Conner's chance at the beginning of the year to still assert his. And I don't know if you saw Conner lately. Like he looks like an incredible Hulk. And I don't know if that's a good thing though, because running backs can get too bulky and less flexible and less dynamic. But I think that was his answer to these injuries that are coming. So, but with Ben Roethlisberger back, that whole offense could outproduce expectations. We'll see how the wide receivers shake out. But I would have liked to have seen a different direction other than Anthony McFarland. But if they do some things with Anthony McFarland, like have him in the shotgun next to Ben when they have 3 or 4 wide receivers in and have the defense spread out and try to see if McFarland can find a crease like on a draw play. It's stuff that I thought they should have done with Justice Hill last year too. Give him the ball on a draw and let him pick a hole and take off, something like that. But you're going to see McFarland more like 6, 8, 10 carries. And much like we were talking about Keyshawn Vaughn, I don't think McFarland's going to ever take over a backfield. But he can add an element, an exciting, explosive element. So we'll see. All those running backs, McFarland and Evans and Josh Kelly, they're all interesting guys who could have their moment in the sun for fantasy, but the weather will change eventually. You mentioned Brian Edwards, and I love that you brought up quarterback play and how you have to contextualize what you saw based on quarterback play. And someone was asking about Cortland Sutton. I'm going to use this as a translation, not to Cortland Sutton, but the general question they were asking. Because Cortland Sutton was a guy, if you watch him at SMU, his quarterback play was so bad that you thought, well, how much can we really tell about him? How much is there that hasn't been unlocked? And that's another good example of contextualizing, where if you look at efficiency or you look at some of these things, you might be seeing more of a read on the quarterback play than the wide receiver play. But there's a really good question someone had asked about Sutton. Poke, my man, asked about thoughts about Sutton. Will he flourish in 2020 or too many mouths to feed? And then Brian Grow piggybacked on that and said to go along with that, what's the tipping point of having talent around you and losing out on targets because there's so much talent around you? And then I think on the other side of that scale, Rich, is, but the more talent there is, the more efficient each target is going to be, and the better the offense is going to function. So you might see Cortland Sutton lose target share, but each target is worth more. And I think defenses, absolutely, we're saying at the second half of the year, we're not going to let Cortland Sutton beat us. You've got to throw to somebody other than Cortland Sutton. So it may still end up being a net gain. Feel free to talk about Sutton, but also this question about, well, now there's more mouths to feed, but if there's more quality talent, then defenses are going to have more trouble slowing down the offense, and those targets are going to be worth more.
Yeah, I do have Denver. I have Denver projected for about 11 more touchdowns than they scored last year as an offense. So there's a little bit there to go around. I mean, my main question is it's always just going to come back to Drew Lock. I mean, Drew Lock was just not a guy that I had pegged as a positive prospect. And although QB wins were a big driving force last year and they won those games, although I would question some of the teams that they did end up winning those games against, he still didn't really show anything that was different from the player that I saw from really Drew Lock in college. So I'm really still questioning. That's why I brought up Denver as the Aaron Rodgers thing. Like if he fails, like, always going to push the panic button probably. I'm surprised they did not add a veteran to really ensure him too this season as well as
Cam Newton.
There's a couple backup situations that I am really puzzled with. Like you brought up the Steelers too, and I just can't believe that they're going to roll in with that same depth chart that they rolled in with last year, given how Hodges and Rudolph played last year. I don't even know how Hodges and Rudolph can even be employed.
JT Barrett. The answer is JT Barrett, Rich. Remember, he's the fifth quarterback.
I don't see how you could, if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers and saw how both those guys performed when they had to play, that you could even roster them at this point. Like they're out of a job if the way you can't play.
I think they have some sort of affinity with Rudolph, and now they're like defending Rudolph's honor. But yeah, Rudolph is, I mean, he was starting to show signs of being competent or adequate as a backup when he got hurt. But absolutely, I mean, the Steelers are in fighting disaster there. So you're right. So that's okay, and everyone can take some joy in that if the Steelers Roethlisberger gets hurt again.
But Denver also could be Denver also is another one of those teams that could easily and all the weapons they got are really young too. So it's also a thing to not jump the gun on. All these guys are year 3 and under. Like we can't just expect all these guys to be amazing, amazing athletic specimens that are just putting the defense on their heels. It's going to take some time for these guys, like it did for Sutton, from rookie year 1 to year 2. And, it could be Noah Fant takes a big step forward, though kind of hit on how Shermer used Ingram. And that kind of gives me a little bit of puzzle. I don't want to see a dozen, just flat routes and speed outs to Noah Fant, like they used Evan Ingram instead of a downfield asset. But it does come down to Drew Lock. And then if this team doesn't trust him, if Drew Lock is still playing in the manner he did, even when he played last year, with this defense, which still is going to be a really good defense, are they just, if they can control some game scripts, how much do they really put the onus on Drew Lock? How much are they really using these weapons? So it really comes down to Drew Lock's play and the game script. I'm still positive on Sutton. He took that year 2 step. There's no reason to believe that the targets are really going to go away from him. And he did struggle with Lock, but like you said, he was really the only man in town, and teams kind of took that away from him towards the end of the season. But like the game script also did as well. They didn't have to really force things to him. So it's an interesting dynamic. I'm still positive. I might be a little lower than the field on him just based on Drew Lock. I still don't really believe in, but because if you look at Sutton, his splits with Flacco were by far the best. Mm-hmm. And say what we want about Joe Flacco, but at least we know Joe Flacco is like an achievable threshold of like adequacy, and we don't know if that is exactly where Drew Lock could get to. He absolutely could, but we have to wait and see. But yeah, I'm still high on him. That whole tier of guys, the Cortland Sutton, McLaurin, I mean even AJ Brown at the top of that tier of young guys that still are not done growing but possessed to the opportunity to be one of these alpha receivers, because I don't want to hijack your show, but I've been going on every show this year and I've been kind of getting this conversation, and I'd just love to hear your take on it. Mm-hmm. given the landscape of the NFL, where running back is in the NFL and where wide receiver is in the NFL, and how that's kind of, we've seen that shift in drafts. We've gotten a big surplus of really good running back talent the last 5 years and some questionable wide receiver talent. And wide receiver depth charts across the NFL, I believe, are just not as good as running back depth charts as they are in the NFL. And we're seeing more wide receivers play in the NFL given the transition to wide receiver 3 and wide receiver 4 involvement in offenses. I mean, you look at passing plays in the NFL, there have been 3 wide receivers on the field for 70% of passing plays over the NFL the past 2 years. But the depth charts are not as strong to warrant all these guys. And I think that's why this draft was such a big timing was so big for this draft, because if you look going down, up and down any depth chart in the NFL, you'd say that team needs wide receiver, that team needs wide receiver, that team needs wide receiver, even if they had a good one, because you need 3 and 4 good wide receivers, and not a lot of teams have those. So I'm curious to get your take on one. If that just involvement of the wide receivers is kind of flattened the curve at the wide receiver position, and how it involves the fantasy a bit, or is it, a combination of we aren't getting these like apex alpha wide receivers in the NFL like we were over, a period of stretch, and will we ever get that again? I'm sure we will. It will shift back towards, DK and AJ Brown definitely fit that, mold of guys that can be that, Julio Jones-esque type guy. But we are getting more guys that are winning in the NFL now, that with versatility over, just size and domination. I think one of the biggest draft picks of this NFL draft was CeeDee Lamb to Dallas Cowboys, because you remove Randall Cobb, who could only play the slot, and now you have 3 players with utmost versatility, and your guy that you just paid $100 million to, Amari Cooper, wins his best when he has flexibility. Where Amari Cooper has gotten nuked in the past is big physical corner, not big physical corners, but just guys that are going to press him. Press coverage is giving Amari Cooper the most trouble in the NFL. Now you allow him to play more slot and move into, even if it's 30 or 40% of his routes, now you give him 2-way goes, and you can challenge the defense on different levels. And it just gives them more ways to win, where Randall Cobb was occupying that role in the offense. Now they got 3 guys that can. But, bringing it back around is that what we see, like that type of one is the way the NFL is transitioning, is that just inherently flattening the curve of wide receiver, or is it like the alpha wide receiver is now a moving target in the NFL?
Yeah, the easy answer is just to say it's both. But I think you're hitting on a couple of one trend and one reality. The reality is that, just AJ Green, Julio Jones, like they're just only so. That's what sometimes people get upset because the word generational is used too much. But really, it's just that there's Calvin Johnson. Like, these guys don't come around that often. And Michael Thomas, although his numbers have been inflated a bit by his relationship with Breeze, but obviously he's a special player. DeAndre Hopkins is a special player. Tyreek Hill, in a different way, is a special player, but he's with the exact right quarterback for his skill set, and so on. So there just aren't that many. And even Tyreek Hill's not really a true alpha receiver in the sense that you can ask him to do anything in the offense. There's certain places where he shines, and there's certain places where you're going to ask someone else to do that job, which leads into the other point. The trend is, I think, just more specialization. And Rich, you remember, man, like I bring this up occasionally on the show, like 15 years ago or so, right when I was really getting my start in the fantasy industry, we were sounding the alarm bell about running back by committee, because that was still a bell cow running back. I mean, there was like Larry Centers and a few players like that, but there wasn't the proliferation of
those fullbacks.
Yeah, there were some guys who were specialized receiving backs, but for the most part, teams didn't look at the backfield as something to break up into specialty roles. And you had teams like the Patriots, of course. Anytime we have one of these conversations, the Patriots are always one of the first teams, right? Like Kevin Falk, The Patriots and other teams started breaking up the roles. And I get it, there's predictability in play calls based on which running back's on the field, et cetera. But we see more teams now breaking up those roles and having different running backs that are best at different parts of the running back role. And for fantasy, it spreads out the production in a way that makes week-to-week stuff more unpredictable. It makes this position where the true bell cows are worth that much more. Like, every first round this year is going to have 8 running backs, probably, depending on the scoring system, as long as it's not super flex, because there just aren't that many of those guys left. And I think teams are doing that more with wide receiver. And it's, as you said, more 3 wide receiver sets, more 4 wide receiver sets. Then you have more guys. And it also depends on the matchup that week, where the weaknesses. I hope that more offensive coordinators are focused on, okay, let's have an offense that can do different things, and depending on our opponent that week and where their weakness is, that's what we're going to do. I think your colleague, I don't want to say your boss, because I know that you have free reign to do your thing, man. You're a lord. Warren Sharp talked about making. I've had him on the show before, and he's talked about making your game plan around the weakness of the opponent instead of your strength. And I think having those varied wide receiver cores sets you up to be able to do that. Denver, I think, has definitely set themselves up to be able to do that. Some weeks they may play more 3 wide receivers. Some weeks they may play more 2 tight end. Some weeks you may see more Philip Lindsay. Some weeks you may not. But isn't that, by the way, real quickly, because I wanna trumpet it real quickly, that I like Melvin Gordon for his value this year. I got him in the early third in a league where running backs. I mean, Kenyon Drake went in the first round in our MFL 10 of death. I see Melvin Gordon as a big beneficiary. Even if things don't click with Drew Lock, even if things don't click with the young wide receivers, the threat that it could for defenses as they approach a week against the Broncos should open things up for Melvin Gordon. And if you have anything to add about Gordon, but I want to go back to before we go off the rails here, maybe a little bit, Soul Brother, because I love our loyal people, man. I want to say, in addition to those of you listening on iTunes or wherever, those people that come as we record these live on YouTube, I really appreciate y'all. And I want to say that this was the player that I had just read your piece on Sharp Football Analysis, which then made me think, oh man, it's been too long since I've had Lord Reeves on the show. And and also in our draft, very relevant. I'm going to tie it all together, Rich. You took this wide receiver over Cortland Sutton. To illuminate the idea, it is DJ Chark, baby Chark. Did you just write up DJ Chark? Or am I imagining that?
I did this week. I've been kind of polling the public to let them kind of steer me, but I've been trying to choose players that are kind of have that yin yang element of amongst the community to kind of walk through both sides to see where both sides are coming from. But I did do DJ Chark, and obviously, when you comparing him to him and Sutton, there's probably I believe a little more target volume for DJ Chark than there probably is Sutton. And then just looking at Chark's breakout in year 2 and then putting it in historical context, which I did in that article, and man, he is in some really good company for year 2 breakouts and type of year 2 spike that he had. I mean, the players that had more year 2 spike in yardage than him are all guys that you would really love, except for the exception of one guy, and it's Steve Preston, who was that
the 3,000-yard receivers. Yeah,
remember, he went from being a punt returner to just a 1,000-yard receiver in that Kurt Warner offense. But Alshon, so the guys that had more year 2 since 2000 of wide receivers that were drafted out of DJ Chark, not to go on read a whole list or anything, but the guys ahead of him were Alshon Jeffrey, Brandon Marshall, Antonio Brown, Steve Preston, Allen Robinson, Josh Gordon, and Chad Johnson. Those are the only guys that had more receiving yards than DJ Chark in year 2 compared to the rookie season that were used that a team spent draft capital on. So I mean, those are just bringing that up alone is pretty intriguing. I want to see where this goes and walk that out. The question with Chark is too, like we talk about Sutton, does he have an ultimate quarterback problem? And I like Minshew for fantasy purposes. I think he has a high floor because he's the less exciting version of Fitzpatrick. He kind of plays with hair on fire, but he doesn't take chances. That's what bothers me about him. He's more of a dink and dunk version of Ryan Fitzpatrick instead of a guy that wants to wing it into these like Fitzpatrick doesn't care. He's like, I've got Mike Evans 1-on-1. I got Deshaun. I'm letting this thing go. I'm letting it rip. Minshew doesn't really have that. And that's my one little hang up. But he does run around. He plays like that. And he is obviously the off-field personality that kind of is a real clear, drawn comparisons to Ryan Fitzpatrick. Mm-hmm. But I'm just curious to see where it goes. Now, Minshew has some runway here now because they traded Foles. They don't really bring in a vet. They draft Luton, who I actually don't mind Luton. I was kind of intrigued by him as a
poor man's Jared Goff.
Yeah. And what's funny is Luton is basically taking it to almost the exact same draft point that Minshew was the year before. But Mitchell's really got to clean up the accuracy problems. I mean, just in terms of expected completion percentage and what he actually completed in terms of a negative route, only David Blau was worse than Gardner Minshew last year. For even all the excitement he gave us in fantasy high points, he threw 21 touchdowns. He got some mobility. But, for his receiver's sakes, he's got to clean up some of this. And if that's going to be a problem, because we saw Shark's floor the back half of the year kind of creep up, and we've seen how more volatile he was. But I'm taking definitely the more positive stance while he's cheap. We talked about Marquise Brown while he's cheap. I'm taking the more positive stance on those guys. Even Cortland Sutton, like his price point, like there's still upside to be had there. Terry McLaurin, all those guys could be 10, 15 picks higher a year from now.
Yes.
So I'm taking the progressive approach on those types of players, and I've done that more as the years have gone on. Gone in on a little bit more of the upside of these players, not trying to poke into the downside because it's easy. Like I said, I do it in these articles. I talk about the downside. Mecole Hardman's a really good guy. Mecole Hardman played 13 games with Sammy Watkins and Tyreek Hill active, and in those games, he had 18 total targets. And then the Chiefs are rolling everyone back. So where does the growth come from? But that's a difference between rankings and projections. You might project a guy, his median projection or overall projections might come out lower, but you don't want to just make a list of drafting off projections because you miss out on, what if the opportunity changes? And that's kind of where Mecole Hardman is and where you draft him. And I think all these guys, so just being ahead of all these guys, I think is fine because the price point can move really early in a year. I mean, one of the biggest guys I follow, and I like to follow his work and how he drafts teams, is Ryan McDowell.
Yes.
And Ryan just does his innate ability to just understand where the market's going to be in the future as opposed to now is something I've really tried to take from him a little bit more over the years, and just understanding where the player values can move. And all these, like we talk about playing the sticker price of Ridley, because it could jump still. So like paying the sticker price for all those guys we kind of mentioned in passing, like is definitely worthwhile because they're not done growing. The price can still become, a lot more richer and you can gain your value. Whereas some of these other guys you might move can't. Listen, Julio Jones cannot increase his dynasty value. Right. He can have 1,300 more yards and he's not going to go up in dynasty market value. It's just the way it is. Guys like Jarvis Landry and stuff like they're not going to be able to really increase their market value by just performing the way they have performed. So, there's definitely, understanding some of that and where the market can move and where you can really gain value on some of these players really matters. And you can apply that to redraft. It's not just the dynasty thing. We talked about it, about all these players that we talked about. There's still room to where these guys are a year from now. We're saying, man, like, oh, God, it was such a great steal. I remember having him last year. Now, it's unfortunate I'm not going to be able to get him this year because he's a second-round pick. But, man, it was great last year. I had him in the 6th round. Because the 6th round isn't, like, when you get past, like, outside of the 4th round, like the difference between a 5th and 6th round pick and like a 9th and 10th, it's not that great. Like, you don't need to be hung up on ADP and say, well, this guy might be there in a round or two. Take him. If that's the guy you want, get him. Like, because then the 5th, like you're not talking about giving away a lot of ground when it's talking about taking a guy in the 8th round and taking him in the 6th round. You're just not. We like to think that is a big deal, but it isn't. It's not like a 1st and 2nd round pick compared to a 4th round pick at all. It definitely tightens up when you get into that range. So don't be scared to reach on those guys, even if they don't work out. You definitely want to play for that upside in that area, definitely. And that's something I've tried to bring more into my game in that area of the draft instead of, like I said, just honing in on the floors of those players.
Absolutely. Wonderful speech on that. And I think that whether it's trading for someone in the offseason, because if you're close on a Mecole Hardman or close on a Terry McLaurin or close on a DJ Chark trade, but you get hung up on, they want a 2nd round next year and I want to go up a 3rd as like the sweetener, you're probably going to regret it. You're probably going to say, I should have given the 2nd because the growth potential. Similarly with reaching for a player, if you're like, well, there are 2 players. This guy has 6th round ADP, but I want to get him. But this guy has 4th round ADP, and I can still get him in the 5th, so I'm going to wait. But if you didn't want that 4th round player to begin with, then you're betraying yourself. We got just a couple minutes left, so we're not truly going to go off the rails. But just really quick, Rich, and I don't want to totally put you on the spot, but give me a word or a few words on just how are you feeling, man? There's so much going on in our country. What's your mood right now?
It's definitely uneasy. It was uneasy even before the past week. It's definitely with the coronavirus and just understanding what was going to happen in the future and then not knowing what's going to happen. Not just from our end of the world and what's going to happen in sports, but, my wife's a teacher. They still don't know what's going to happen in schools come the fall. We don't know if like colleges are going to go back. We don't know how, it's still going to be handled in that. And then, obviously we had the repeat of history again happen, I think that's the most frustrating, embarrassing, and sad part of everything is that we inherently know all the wrong things. So we're not learning from mistakes in the world as citizens in civilization. Right. And I think that's the most, like I said, it's embarrassing, it's frustrating, and it's just outright sad that these things keep happening. And I struggle to find, my place to chime in on this as a, Caucasian male, and a Caucasian male that makes his living off of, writing about sports and athletics that is predominantly, played by African Americans. So it's definitely, I've kind of just been listening. I haven't really found a great avenue to find footing and, really try to deliver a message, or even if I should deliver a message, am I adding to what am I bringing to it? It's really hard to find that common ground. I mean, we would think though, as just human beings at this point and how we've lived life and everyone living life, that starting at just a baseline of empathy for human life would be an easy baseline to start at. And it's really frustrating that it's not, no matter what your profession is. So, I mean, it's like I said, it's embarrassing, sad, it's frustrating. We're still here. I haven't really found a great footing to find out where my place is in this and how to add on and improve the quality of the discussion that has happened. But definitely even just incorporating everything going on in life and, in the world, in particular outside of this, because we, even before the coronavirus and, the world is, the oceans are shrinking, coming in on land. There's a lot of fragility. And I think it's just been heightened and maximized these past 6 months. The fragility of life in general that we know it has really been brought to life, and how fragile, how thin the ice exactly was for all this in our economy and just way of life. It's an uneasy time, and I know football is not on the forefront of a lot of people's mind, and we're here doing our job, just trying to be a little bit of a distraction to some of that. But I don't think that, and I think, speaking for you too, that us continuing to do our job is not, I don't see it as us being tone deaf either. Like I said, this particular instance, I have trouble finding my footing, but I'm definitely not tone deaf to the situation that's going on, just because I haven't blasted a lot of tweets out on it.
Right.
And it's tough. It's a tough situation. And, I'm an inherently positive person anyways, and live my life on a positive end. And like I said, it's frustrating, embarrassing, and sad is really the three adjectives that really come to mind in this particular case over the past, 7-10 days.
That was well said, man. No, I think you articulated just a soul that you said has empathy and feels things and is connected to everybody and connected to what's happening. And I think that most importantly, like, we're married men, and in a marriage, even if your ego is telling you I'm right, or I everything I'm doing is okay, if your partner says no, I'm feeling something different, and then you hopefully, to make the marriage work, to make the relationship work, you have to hear that person and really be open to the idea that there's something that you're not perceiving, or something that you need to update your understanding about. And we're experiencing that on a society-wide level now, and we'll see how it goes. But even just raising children, I think it's like maybe the biggest impact we can have, more than how we use our pedestal, is just the values that we impart to our children, and not what we say or teach, but just how they watch us, how we conduct ourselves. It's all the stuff that we do that isn't, when we're thinking about being a role model for our kids, that they actually pay the most attention to, right?
Right.
Like the way we talk to our friends when our friends are around, or the way we deal with our wives and things like that. And having that humility and wanting to still be part of the interaction and being open to that. But I'm with you, man. I feel heaviness. I feel weight. I try to be a positive person because I just prefer the alternative. And that heaviness and that weight is part of the internet that's always been there. Before there was the internet, we're all connected. Go ahead.
No, I agree with you.
Just, and we can feel it, man. And and we'll see. I mean, like you said, frustration, embarrassment, that we're like, time is a flat circle, right? Like, we're just repeating the same thing. We've had a lot of peaceful protests. We've had a lot of attempts to be, polite or respectful of the social order to bring these issues to the forefront, and it hasn't worked. And I think anyone who's a student of history sees the patterns that are playing out here. And the question is, what's the response going to be in our population and by the leadership of our country? And how things are going to go, and it's open-ended. Uncertainty, man. We are living in the times of true uncertainty. And as fantasy football analysts, we're perfectly equipped for that, right? Because we're trying to like harness something that's uncertain and convince people that we have some idea of what's going to happen. But this is true uncertainty. We're in real time. There's so many variables of human behavior, and they're variables of human behavior because, man, like now we've got like marketing and stuff that can predict down to the, if we run this ad, we're going to get like 7% more sales or something like that. Like they felt like they had our behavior pinpointed and they could just predict down to the, 0.1% what they were going to be how human beings would react. But now we're in a situation that's unprecedented. A pandemic, a depression, and social unrest all at the same time. There's no template to say, well, now here's how human beings are going to react in this moment to this stimulus, this whatever is introduced to the situation. So really, we're writing the next chapter. We're all writing the next chapter, which can be scary, and it can also be hopeful. And again, it depends on what you think of your fellow human being. It depends on what you think of maybe some of the structural foundations of our country, which maybe need to change. But I know, Rich, as long as there's people like you, man, I'm confident because your ears are open and you care and you're feeling and you're not afraid to say, hey, I am feeling things about this and I'm not sure what my place is, but I know that something's happening and it's important. And it's always something happening when we get together from the very first time. And you always, Rich, you're going to break the land speed record on like information delivered in a minute. Remember John Mosqueda? Are you old enough to remember those Federal Express commercials? Like
no, but I remember the Micro Machine guy. Like,
yeah, that was him. I think.
Oh, that's the same guy. The same guy. Okay.
I think it's John Mosqueda. Yeah, who could speak like, they do it like the commercials because they have to put disclaimers in on radio commercials. I don't know if you listen to the radio much anymore, but they put these disclaimers in like offer only available. Check with the order. Like the side effects in one of the pharmaceutical commercials. When they have to put in like may cause if it lasts for 4 hours, call your doctor. And it's great, man, because I think it embodies your desire to share with everybody all the stuff that makes your mind pop and light up. And that's why I always love having you on. And I always look forward to our chances to be on a show together. Sharp football analysis, Lord Reebs, R-E-B-S. You already know this. You know his work. Everybody out there, stay safe. Let your voice be heard. Listen to everybody. And yeah, keep wearing that mask. Wash your hands. Social distance. Let's all take care of each other. And hopefully we all make it to something better and something where we feel even closer. I appreciate the opportunity to do this. We love you so much. And thank you for giving us the chance to do this because you're so very classy.